You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Monday the 4th of March. Big brass ones, Theresa May or the Mail on Sunday. London, Muslims seek dialogue with next Pope. Lest we break the Liberals' illiberal code. Bellamy Van Aalst, Hezbollah may be prepared to use biological weapons in Europe. Denmark, Liberals force immigrant women to work. Belgium, Muslims in EU await fatwa on fish feed containing pork. Al-Qaeda publishes its latest hit list. Holy Moses, 1 down, 9 to go. Thought for the day, Romanians, Bulgars, Islam and inbreeding. And finally, is it a superhero or what? UK news. Big brass ones, Theresa May or the Mail on Sunday. British Home Secretary Theresa May vows to take the UK out of European Court of Human Muslim Terrorist Rights and the Mail on Sunday claims. It marks a triumph for the Mail on Sunday's campaign against the ludicrous abuses of justice carried out in the name of human rights. Let's be clear, this is just another campaign pledge by a struggling government, as the Express made clear in their Tories' pledge to scrap Dangerous Human Rights Act. The hated Human Rights Act will be abolished if the Tory party wins the next general election, Justice Secretary Chris Grayling pledged yesterday. It would be great news if the government actually planned to scrap the European Convention on Human Rights ahead of the next election, but to pledge they will do so if elected is just another callous betrayal of Britain and the British people. World at 8 says, the only thing the Mail on Sunday and Theresa May have to crow about is the carrion of their empty claims and promises. Shout the rhetoric loud and long and the empty-headed public will believe it one more time. London, Muslims seek dialogue with next Pope. Harvey Morris of the International Herald Tribune wrote, as the Catholic Church's cardinal electors gather at the Vatican to choose a new Pope, Muslim leaders are urging a revival of the often troubled dialogue between the two faiths. During the papacy of Benedict XVI, relations between the world's two largest religions were overshadowed by remarks he made in 2006 that were widely condemned as an attack on Islam. Apparently the rampant worldwide Muslim persecution of Christians didn't hurt relations at all. It was only Benedict's remarks that were at fault. In a speech at Regensburg University in his native Germany, Benedict quoted a 14th century Byzantine emperor as saying, "Show me just what Muhammad brought that was new, and there you will find things only evil and inhuman, such as his command to spread by the sword the faith he preached." Despite the Vatican's effort to renew the interfaith dialogue by hosting a meeting with Muslim scholars, hostilities resumed in 2011 when the Pope condemned alleged discrimination against Egypt's Coptic Christians in the wake of a church bombing in Alexandria. Al-Azhar University in Cairo, the centre of Islamic learning, froze relations with the Vatican in protest. World at 8 says, there can be no reconciliation or dialogue between Christianity and Islam, as they are polar opposites. You can only have a dialogue if the other side is willing to realise its faults as you recognise yours. There's no possibility of this happening with Muslims, as they consider themselves the perfect people. So the new Pope should defend the Christian faith and forget about dialogue with the Muslims. It's a waste of time. Lest we break the Liberals' illiberal code. Our new intolerance means we must watch our words and our backs, lest we break the Liberals' illiberal code. This was the title of a blog post last week by Christina O'Doney, writing for The Telegraph. On Thursday the 28th of February 2013, the High Court began hearing to decide whether a Christian group that helps gays overcome their sexual inclination has the right to advertise its services. You may remember that Stonewall, the gay rights group, was allowed to run the slogan, "Some people are gay, get over it," on London buses. But when Core Issues Trust CIT, a Christian group, decided to counter it with a poster that read "Not gay, post gay, ex-gay and proud, get over it," Mayor Boris Johnson vetoed their campaign and the TfL, Transport for London, pulled the advert. Christina went on to say, if the High Court ruling goes against CIT, as I fear it will, the judgment will prove a setback for free speech as well as religious freedom. As Philip Johnson writes in today's Telegraph, just as gays are entitled to extol their own sexual identity, so people who take another view, on whatever grounds, should be allowed to say so, shouldn't they? World Date writer says, for once we agree with the Telegraph. It's a shame they don't worry about freedom of speech for nationalists. Still, it is a plus that someone is still allowed to speak for Christians, or are they? Ms O'Doney went on to say she was worried about our newfound intolerance. British intolerance is not newfound, it's been around for centuries. The 17th century settlers to the English colonies in the New World fled religious persecution in England for the relative safety of that country. European news. Bellamy Van Alst, Hezbollah may be prepared to use biological weapons in Europe. Dr Jill Bellamy Van Alst has an important article published in the current edition of Dispatch International, DI, warning that Europe could face a formidable biowarfare BW terrorist threat. Hezbollah may be prepared to use biological weapons in Europe. The terrorist organisation has already pre-designated targets across the EU. The deteriorating situation in Syria increases the risk Hezbollah will or has acquired BW agents. Europe should be very concerned about its growing Muslim communities and its inability to comprehend the consequences a massive BW attack would have across its territory. If we fail to designate Hezbollah as a terrorist organisation, if we continue to fear reprisals, we are all at risk. Should Hezbollah decide to deploy a biological weapon in the next time instead of a conventional bomb, the consequences could be devastating, not only to Europe but to the international community. Our World Date European writer says, should this happen, then it is the end for the Muslims in Europe, or at the very least civil war will break out. The dhimmi governments will have two choices, to support the indigenous people or to crack down on the Muslims. Either way it will be bloody, or they will have to bring in the army, and I cannot see the army supporting a government that goes after the indigenous population. There is also the probability of military dictatorship and an obvious massive boost to nationalist parties all over Europe that'll make Golden Dawn's activities look positively mild. I happen to know something about these weapons and they can easily kill 10,000 people. Imagine if they were to use them in multiple locations on a tube in London or Paris. Denmark, Liberals force immigrant women to work. Politiken, DK, reports government spokesman says long-term unemployed non-Western women should be forced to work. The Liberal Social Affairs spokesman, Evind Vezelbo, says enough is enough after a survey has shown that almost 6,000 immigrant women have been on social security for more than 10 years out of the past 15. The number is almost 25% of those who are on long-term social security. Unfortunately, there is a widespread view that these immigrant women are weak and it's a pity for them. It's an unfortunate view and a discriminating one. Taking too much consideration for this group is looking down on them and saying that there's not much that they can do. That's what it was like in the 90s, and so nowadays we have created an unemployment culture amongst immigrants, Veselbo says. Asked whether the government is afraid to tackle the problem, Veselbo says he is not sure but nothing has been done. It's probably more an unwillingness to do something about it because a large part of the government sees these women as weak, as people who cannot speak Danish and who don't have the requirements. I don't agree, they've been in Denmark for more than 10 years, so it can't be right that they don't speak Danish, said Veselbo, adding that these women should be forced to work. Danish society has the same requirements for these women to work as it does for everyone else. Everyone has the responsibility to contribute, he says. One of the things we should look at is why these women are not working. Is it because their husbands won't allow them to? If so, councils should make sure that the men are not a problem by saying there's no more money, Veselbo said. A World Date writer states, it means that these women can stay at home on monies provided by the state and breed more Muslims instead of working as most Western women have to, whether married or not. Anti-Islamists vow to impeach Muslim extremist politicians. Russia Today reported Belgian politicians have submitted a proposal to impeach or limit the influence of Muslim extremists in power. MPs fear that Muslim politicians who refuse to even shake hands with women are creating an isolated Islamic state within Belgium. Alain Desetche, a Liberal member of the Federation Wallonia-Brussels and Deputy Mayor of Kokelenburg Philippe Vivin, submitted the proposal in front of the Belgian Parliament on Wednesday to exclude extremist parties from a range of local functions. The proposal is currently open for signatures by other members of Parliament. The people of the Islamic Party do not want to be mixed with others in public transport and other communal places. Local media quoted Alain Desetche as saying, "They advocate getting married and wearing a veil at 12 years old based on Islamic law." Desetche referred specifically to the newly established Islam Party in Belgium, which has won 2 seats in municipal elections in October 2012 and vowed to implement Islamic Sharia law in that country. "I feel that some people do not understand how they are creating their own isolated community," Desetche explained. Redain Al-Rouch, Abdeldehay Bakali Takahiri, president of Federation of Bruxelles Capitale, Lucine At-Jiding, said after being elected in October, "We are elected Islamists, but above all we are Muslims. Islam is compatible with the laws of the Belgian people. As elected Muslims we embrace the Quran and the tradition of the Prophet Muhammad. We believe Islam is a universal religion. Our presence on the town council will give us the opportunity to express ourselves." Arouche especially is known for refusing to shake hands or make eye contact with women in public. Belgium. Muslims in EU await fatwa on fish feed containing pork. The Egyptian Independent reports Egyptians living in Belgium are awaiting a religious edict from Al-Azhar on whether it is forbidden for Muslims to eat fish that had been fed pork fat protein. The European Union recently approved legislation allowing EU fish farmers to use fat proteins from animals, including pigs, starting in June. The decision has triggered alarm amongst Muslim communities living in Europe and prompted Islamic organisations in Brussels, the Belgian capital, to ask religious institutions to issue an official fatwa. Islam bans Muslims from consuming pork products as the meat is unclean. Garib Radwan, an Egyptian driver living in Brussels, said, "It's very crucial to have a decision and we trust Islamic organisations in Egypt will rule on the matter." A World Today writer says, "Yup, make it more and more pork than ever." World News. Al-Qaeda publishes its latest hit list. The latest edition of the Al-Qaeda English language magazine Inspire is out today. A digital copy of the magazine provided by MEMRI shows a wanted, dead or alive feature on page 10 of the new issue. "Wanted, dead or alive for crimes against Islam," the page reads. The list includes Molly Norris, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, Fleming Rose, Maurice Squadique, Salman Rushdie, Geert Wilders, Lars Vilk, Stephanie Charbonnet, Carsten Lust, Terry Jones and Kurt Vestergaard. No further reason is provided to explain why these folks were singled out for the hit list, though many are notable critics of radical Islam. Those targeted by Al-Qaeda include Carsten Just, lead editor of Jyllands-Posten during the cartoons controversy. Terry Jones, the Florida pastor who declared Islam is of the devil, declared September 11th to be International Burn a Koran Day and became an unlikely symbol of free speech when leaders of both the Democratic and Republican parties called for him to be held liable for Al-Qaeda attacks. Jones has been sentenced to death by an Egyptian court after the Arab Spring. Kurt Vestergaard, who drew the most simple and propagandist of the Jyllands-Posten cartoons and has survived one assassination attempt, with a second attempt stopped in its planning stages. Geert Wilders, leader of the Dutch Nationalist Freedom Party of the Netherlands. Lars Vilks, who drew a cartoon of a dog with Mohammed's face. He's been attacked at a public appearance and an assassination attempt was stopped by police. Vilks has previously drawn Jesus as a paedophile and attempted to secede from Sweden. Stephanie Charbonnet, editor of the comedy magazine Charlie Hebdo, which reacted to the Arab Spring by calling itself Sharia Hebdo and publishing Mohammed on the cover, which resulted in its offices being burnt down. Charlie Hebdo has since published more offensive cartoons to deliberately provoke the right. In 2006, Charlie Hebdo, under editor Philippe Val, published the Jyllands-Posten cartoons in 2006 and was subsequently prosecuted by the French government at the direction of Jacques Chirac and found innocent. Fleming Rose, an editor at Jyllands-Posten. Maurice Sadiq, National American Coptic Assembly, which is basically his blog. His Egyptian citizenship was revoked after the Arab Spring. He had translated into Arabic the promotional clip for the movie Innocence of Muslims, which has been falsely blamed for the September 11th anniversary attacks on US assets in 2012, and there have been attempts to blame Sadiq for the violence. Salman Rushdie, the author of the book The Satanic Verses, who was sentenced to death by Ayatollah Khomeini in 1989. One of the book's editors has been killed and 2 have survived assassination attempts. Ayaan Hirsi Ali, a feminine activist from Somalia who wrote the screenplay for the movie Submission. The movie's director, Theo van Gogh, was assassinated in 2004. Molly Norris, a cartoonist from the US state of Washington who declared Everybody Draw Mohammed Day in response to the death threats received by South Park cartoonists Trey Parker and Matt Stone in 2010. Mazel Tov! Israel introduces Palestinian-only buses. Israel Haaretz reports Afikim Bus Company to have special buses for Palestinian workers commuting from the West Bank to jobs in central Israel in reaction to complaints from Jews that Palestinians are a security risk, above a photo of Palestinian protesters on an Israeli bus last year. On the same subject, their Salon places the report above photo of Israeli bus bombings by Palestinians. Haaretz goes on to say, starting on Monday, certain buses running from the West Bank into central Israel will have separate lines for Jews and Arabs. The Afikim Bus Company will begin operating Palestinian-only bus lines from the checkpoints to Gush Dan to prevent Palestinians from boarding buses with Jewish passengers. World Date writer says that sounds like a reasonable solution to suicide bombers from the West Bank. It'll keep them separate from their targets. Holy Moses, 1 down, 9 to go. Plague of 30 million locusts hit Egypt just in time for Passover. From the Atlantic Wire and Bare Naked Islam. A plague of over 30 million locusts swarmed over Egypt's cities and farms just 3 weeks before Passover begins. Although this happens every year as part of the locust natural migration pattern, this year's swarms are larger than ever before. Egyptians are freaked out by millions of nasty bugs buzzing through the air at all hours of day and night, descending upon the agricultural fields where they're known to destroy entire crops, just like the Passover story. Plague of Locusts, Exodus 10:1-20. This is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. Let my people go, so that they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go, I will bring locusts into your country tomorrow. They will cover the face of the ground, so that it cannot be seen. They will devour what little you have left after the hail, including every tree that is growing in your fields. They will fill your houses and those of all your officials and all the Egyptians, something neither your fathers nor your forefathers have ever seen from the day they settled in this land until now. This presenter says I like this guy. No room for Sharia law in multicultural society, says Patricia Cavalis in The Australian. Islamic law and polygamous marriages will be denounced as forever unacceptable in Australia in a bipartisan parliamentary report that will define what multiculturalism means for our nation and state there must be only one law for all. The report, the result of a 2-year investigation into Australia's multicultural strategy, is understood to be critical of the limited access migrants have to English language training and the lack of cultural awareness shown by employers and the Federal Employment Recruitment Agency. It's also understood to make the recommendation that a national multicultural research centre be established, funded by the federal government and run independently. The centre's chief role will be to conduct research on how communities are integrating and identify their needs. World Date says, they can say anything that is unacceptable in a multicultural society, but in our view multiculturalism is in and of itself unacceptable, and it will ruin Australia just like it ruins every other country where it is practised. Thought for the day: Romanians, Bulgars, Islam and inbreeding. Now, before you all run for the hills, I'm covering in my thought today the possible and probable effect of the inrush of Romanians and Bulgarians expected next year will have on our already stretched public services due to already high immigrant populations and the long-lasting effects of interbreeding, and the result on the indigenous populations of this country of ours as I still refer to the UK. Now, the Romanian and Bulgarian influx have different problems for different reasons. Both countries have not yet been accepted into the Schengen passport-free zone as yet. This week their respective bids will be reviewed by the EU, and Germany has said it will block any move to accept them. The Schengen area has 26 nations who can travel on a passport-free travel zone known as the Schengen area. It's been reported by France Press that Germany is not happy with the addition of Romania and Bulgaria. Now what I am concerned about is the religious aspect of all this immigration into what used to be a Christian country, with an interesting spatter of other religions. Over 70,000 people per year are estimated to arrive in this country from early 2014 onwards and in perpetuity. Bad enough that they are coming in at all to swell the ranks of an increasingly multi-faith and multicultural society which has existed quite happily for hundreds of years on one small island, which is already divided into three, comprising of England, Scotland and Wales, forming a united kingdom. I have been researching the religions of those newcomers, and in Bulgaria they can boast of 577,139 Muslims as of 2011. These include some of the Ahmadiyya sect, which is shunned by mainstream Islam. However, in Romania the picture is different, as they also boast the highest population of Roma gypsies which follow their own faith, so the result is that there are 67,257 Turks, Tartars and Albanians of the Muslim faith. But as these numbers are from 2002, you can bet they've quadrupled in the last 10 years. As you can see, not only has 30 years of intensive immigrant farming had an already disastrous effect on our country, but the probability of even more peoples of the Islamic religion coming in unchecked and unstopped will be life-changing, not only for us, but the older immigrants from the 50s and 60s who have integrated to an extent. So no wonder that many of them are anti-immigration with regard to their European fellows. It isn't all altruistic on their part though, it is self-survival, because many of those older migrants are not Muslim, and we all know that Islam is not peaceful and does not coexist with other mainstream religions. To quote France Press, any move to expand the Schengen area, home to 400 million Europeans who can cross borders without a passport, needs a unanimous vote, which the Netherlands has in the past staunchly opposed, including Romania and Bulgaria. Romanian Prime Minister Victor Ponta said Saturday that his country's membership of Schengen was no longer a priority for his government if the issue was again pushed back at the EU ministers' meeting this week. The government has done everything it could, so that decision is positive and I still have hopes for that, Ponta told the Media Facts Agency. So there is very little that can stand between these Eastern Europeans and the rest of us now. Our government is unlikely to bring in any laws to stop them, even despite the ridiculous heading in the Mail on Sunday, a great day for British Justice and Theresa May, who seems to be set to pull out of the European Convention on Human Rights that allows all and sundry criminals to live and prosper in the country. What baffles me is that this move is highlighted as meaning foreign courts can no longer meddle in British justice. But I was under the impression that previous governments had adopted the Bill of Human Rights into its texts, and it formed part of British law, so how can this be done? We don't have a constitution in England, so this would seem a dual wannabe victory for the present government, the forthcoming elections next year and the Mail. The fact of the matter is that we have too many followers of Islam in this country now, and the fact of future waves coming in does not bode well for our culture or our society such as it is. Also, a much ignored fact is that Muslims breed. It is the one thing they do well. Even in countries where they're starving, they will still produce children, or of course move to the UK, where they're practically force-fed and encouraged to do so. The official world population of Muslims are 1,519,747,000 odd. Now these figures could be old, and as we know soon will be, as every day thousands more babies are born and thousands more people immigrate. Now on the subject of breeding, there is an unspoken and un-PC result of particularly Muslim interbreeding and first cousins marrying first cousins for generations, which is in their culture, not the Western culture nowadays, where per capita there are just too many people on this planet and certainly in this country. I was privy to a very good and sensible document on 1400 years of inbreeding, and I will read it to you. It sets out the reasons for this thought today, and I quote, 1,400 years of inbreeding. Nicolai Sennels is a Danish psychologist who has done extensive research into a little known problem in the Muslim world: the disastrous results of Muslim inbreeding brought on by the marriage of first cousins. This practice, which has been prohibited in the Judeo-Christian tradition since the days of Moses, was sanctioned by Muhammad and has been going on now for 50 generations, that is 1,400 years, in the Muslim world. This practice of inbreeding will never go away in the Muslim world, since Muhammad is the ultimate example and authority on all matters, including marriage. The massive inbreeding in Muslim culture may well have done virtually irreversible damage to the Muslim gene pool, including extensive damage to its intelligence, sanity and health. According to Sennels, close to half of all Muslims in the world are inbred. In Pakistan the numbers approach 70%. Even in England more than half of Pakistani immigrants are married to their first cousins, and in Denmark the number of inbred Pakistani immigrants is around 40%. The numbers are equally devastating in other important Muslim countries: 67% in Saudi Arabia, 64% in Jordan and Kuwait, 63% in Sudan, 60% in Iraq and 54% in United Arab Emirates and Qatar. According to the BBC, this Pakistani Muslim-inspired inbreeding is thought to explain the probability that a British Pakistani family is more than 13 times as likely to have children with recessive genetic disorders. While Pakistanis are responsible for 3% of the births in the UK, they account for 33% of children with genetic birth defects. The risk of what are called autosomal recessive disorders such as cystic fibrosis and spinal muscular atrophy is 18 times higher, and the risk of death due to malformations is 10 times higher. Other negative consequences of inbreeding include a 100% increase in the risk of stillbirths and a 50% increase in the possibility that a child will die during labour. Lowered intellectual capacity is another devastating consequence of Muslim marriage patterns. According to Sennels, research shows that children of consanguineous marriages lose 10 to 16 points off their IQ, and that social abilities develop much slower in inbred babies. The risk of having an IQ lower than 70, the official demarcation for being classified as retarded, increases by an astonishing 400% amongst children of cousin marriages. Similar effects were seen in the pharaonic dynasties in ancient Egypt and in the British royal family, where inbreeding was the norm for a significant period of time. In Denmark, non-Western immigrants are more than 300% more likely to fail the intelligence test required for entrance into the Danish army. Sennels said that the ability to enjoy and produce knowledge and abstract thinking is simply lower in the Islamic world. He points out that the Arab world translates just 330 books every year, about 20% of what Greece alone does. In the last 1,200 years of Islam, just 100,000 books have been translated into Arabic, about what Spain does in a single year. 7 out of 10 Turks have never even read a book. Sennels points out the difficulties this creates for Muslims seeking to succeed in the West. A lower IQ, together with a religion that denounces critical thinking, surely makes it harder for many Muslims to have success in our high-tech knowledge societies. Only 9 Muslims have ever won the Nobel Prize, and 5 of those were for the Peace Prize. According to Nature magazine, Muslim countries produced just 10% of the world average when it comes to scientific research, measured by articles per million inhabitants. In Denmark, Sennels' native country, Muslim children are grossly overrepresented amongst children with special needs. 1/3 of the budget for Danish schools is consumed by special education, and anywhere from 51% to 70% of retarded children with physical handicaps in Copenhagen have an immigrant background. Learning ability is severely affected as well. Studies indicated that 64% of school children with Arabic parents are still illiterate after 10 years in the Danish school system. The immigrant dropout rate in Danish high schools is twice that of the native born. Mental illness is also a product. The closer the blood relative, the higher the risk of schizophrenic illness. The increased risk of insanity may explain why more than 40% of patients in Denmark's biggest ward for clinically insane criminals have an immigrant background. The US is not immune. According to Sennels, one study based on 300,000 Americans shows that the majority of Muslims in the USA have a lower income, are less educated and have worse jobs than the population as a whole. Sennels concludes, there is no doubt that the widespread tradition of first cousin marriages amongst Muslims has harmed the gene pool amongst Muslims. Because Muslims' religious beliefs prohibit marrying non-Muslims and thus prevents them from adding fresh genetic material to their population, the genetic damage done to their gene pool since their prophet allowed first cousin marriages 1400 years ago are most likely massive. This has produced overwhelming direct and indirect human and societal consequences. Bottom line, Islam is not simply a benign and morally equivalent alternative to the Judeo-Christian tradition. As Sennels points out, the first and biggest victims of Islam are the Muslims themselves. Now, although this damning document applies mainly to Denmark, it applies to all European countries that accept and encourage Muslim immigrants to their cities. These stats cannot be ignored. It points out the fact that if several Arabic tribes converted to Islam over 1,000 years ago and they had stayed in those regions and not been nomadic, they would have bred themselves into idiocy and not presented the future threat to Western civilization that they do now. Islam is a culture, not a religion, and it seeks to conquer and convert. Therefore, the fact that their retarded population is higher than most does not appear to worry them. Why? Because in most cases where they have immigrated to foreign, kinder shores, it is the indigenous peoples who are paying for the additional services that the products of Muslim inbreeding produce. It is obvious even to the most liberal lovies that Islam does not forbid intermarriage and does not condemn its progeny. Therefore, it will be down to the countries that still take in Muslims to regulate them in some way before we all become village idiots. And as a well-known saying goes in the UK, we have our own village idiots, why import more? Why indeed? Many of these retarded youngsters will go on to breed with cousins and produce yet more of their kind. Muslim families often look after these children themselves with financial help from whatever country they're in, and they're free to marry and indeed are encouraged to do so and lead lives as normal as possible. Which sounds very nice and kind, but it isn't in the least for the host country. England has always been hard on its own challenge, but appears to be going out of character in allowing foreign challenge to prosper and breed. Our own used to be sent to circuses or simply thrown out or sent to mental asylums. If anyone tried to do the same with the Muslim challenged, just imagine the cries of Nazi and fascist and worse. And yet, what can a country do to stop this silent invasion of Islam at its very worst and insidious? We have mentally and physically challenged people of our own, and I don't resent the money they need to live. However, these foreign challenged will and do drain our economy, our health services, our social services, and take up our land in housing and special schools, and yes, we still have thousands more potential breeders coming over, even not including the Bulgarians and the Romanians. How can one be considerate of one's own people and country and yet still allow this to happen? It just isn't possible. The facts of inbreeding for so many years are irrefutable and could possibly account for the lack of humour in those countries where Islam started, the lack of common sense, the cruelty to animals and their own people, and the general lack of respect for the rest of the world. The only thing a Muslim appears to respect is the Quran, a book founded by an idiot for future idiots. Now, the stats for the Bulgarians and Romanians are conservative. Looking at the state of their countries, where would you rather be? Of course, over here in the UK. Romania boasts thousands of Greek Orthodox Christians, but it won't be those who will leave the mother country. It'll be mainly the Muslims who will decide to come to the UK, many of whom already have relations here. And it will be the poor bloody English who build the houses, fund the breeders, look after the retards, pay through the nose for them to live here, often in a house better than the host's, and weave the magic wave of multiculturalism over our schools and society to accommodate them. And our government, whoever it might be, will happily accept the kudos from the EU because Europe will be spared the main rush of migrants. And haven't we done well? Group hug everyone. Well, that is if you can ignore the retards and the people riddled with disease, because they will be. TB rates and worse will soar, the rate of idiot children produced will double because the average Muslim family has 6 children to our 2. And you cannot argue ethnicity with figures. It ain't racist, matey, it's a fact. Besides, Islam is a religion so-called, not an ethnic band, which is what makes it so dangerous. You can be any colour and be a Muslim. Islam is the true multiculturalism of ethnicities with one ideology, rather like communism, which is why the two should go together well, but they don't. They're too much alike. So what is the answer? Well, unless you belong to the Mole Liberation Army, that is, live in total darkness and are blind, it's obvious. Stopping all forms of immigration from Muslim countries, and any other country for a start, and until that's done, Ellis Island should be the name of the game. Don't even allow immigrants onto the mainland before being medically checked. Airports, the same. In fact, take off the immigrant staff of airports and put in out-of-work Brits. Job done. Illegals coming in by truck just turn away. The White Cliffs should have guns on them to make the point. Sounds tough, but we will need tough measures to deal with immigrants in the future, or else there'll be no Brits to do it at all. Which of course may be what the powers that be want. A land of diseased foreigners all working, when they do, for large corporations who are offshore and don't have to live in the circumstances that they have brought about. Sound familiar? Just look at the countries Islam has ruined and thus contributed the most to moving populations across the Western Hemisphere. What do you see? Do you see one thing that you would like a duplicate of in this country? If you do, you're a better man than I, Gunga Din. I see fear, poverty, cruelty, stupidity. In fact, I see England reverting back past the Dark Ages into a nun-time of blackness. That is, if we survive the diseases that will spread. Don't look to the US for help, because they will have the same problems as us, and the Chinese are too busy repopulating Africa to bother with Europe, I hope. We're on our own and need to think along those lines now. And finally, is it a superhero or what? Well, that is the question. A mystery vigilante dragged a wanted man by the scruff of the neck into a city centre police station, where he handed him over to officers and told them, "I've caught this one for you." He was dressed in a grey superhero outfit that was more carnival store than his Hollywood doppelganger sport, and his paunch leads to the belief that he has a less than rigorous exercise programme than the six-packers who usually play this role. This bizarre incident was photographed by CCTV cameras in a Bradford police station last week. Also, sadly, whilst in Gotham, Batman takes on the Joker and the Penguin with megalomaniac plans for world domination. His quarry on this occasion was a tracksuit-wearing 27-year-old accused of handling stolen goods and fraud offences. But this Batman may be just as elusive as Bruce Wayne, but of course without the millions behind him, as he's wandering about the streets of Bradford. And he waited patiently at the police station before handing over the suspect, who is now due to appear before magistrates this week. One could well say, is it a bird, is it a plane? No, it's not Superman, it's Bradford Batman. You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozar and I wish you all a very good night. So if elected, is just another callous betrayal of Britain and the British people. World at 8 says, the only thing the Mail on Sunday and Theresa May have to crow about is the carrion of their empty claims and promises. Shout the rhetoric loud and long and the empty-headed public will believe it one more time. London. Muslims seek dialogue with next Pope. Harvey Morris of the International Herald Tribune wrote, as the Catholic Church's cardinal electors gather at the Vatican to choose a new Pope, Muslim leaders are urging a revival of the often troubled dialogue between the two faiths. During the papacy of Benedict XVI, relations between the world's two largest religions were overshadowed by remarks he made in 2006 that were widely condemned as an attack on Islam. Apparently the rampant worldwide Muslim persecution of Christians didn't hurt relations at all. It was only Benedict's remarks that were at fault. In a speech at Regensburg University, thought for the day, Romanians, Bulgars, Islam and inbreeding. And finally, is it a superhero or what? UK News. Big brass ones, Theresa May or the Mail on Sunday. British Home Secretary Theresa May vows to take the UK out of European Court of Human Muslim Terrorist Rights and the Mail on Sunday claims. It marks a triumph for the Mail on Sunday's campaign against the ludicrous abuses of justice carried out in the name of human rights. Let's be clear, this is just another campaign pledge by a struggling government, as the Express made clear in their Tories' pledge to scrap dangerous Human Rights Act. The hated Human Rights Act will be abolished if the Tory party wins the next general election, Justice Secretary Chris Grayling pledged yesterday. It would be great news if the government actually planned to scrap the European Convention on Human Rights ahead of the next election, but to pledge they will do so in his native Germany, Benedict quoted a 14th century Byzantine emperor as saying, "Show me just what Mohammed brought that was new, and there you will find things only evil and inhuman, such as his command to spread by the sword the faith he preached." Despite the Vatican's effort to renew the interfaith dialogue by hosting a meeting with Muslim scholars, hostilities resumed in 2011 when the Pope condemned alleged discrimination against Egypt's Coptic Christians in the wake of a church bombing in Alexandria. Al-Azhar University in Cairo, the centre of Islamic learning, froze relations with the Vatican in protest. World says, there can be no reconciliation or dialogue between Christianity and Islam, as they are polar opposites. You can only have a dialogue if the other side is willing to realise its faults as you recognise yours. There's no possibility of this happening with Muslims, as they consider themselves the perfect people. So the new Pope should defend the Christian faith and forget about dialogue.
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Monday the 4th of March. Big brass ones, Theresa May or the Mail on Sunday. London, Muslims seek dialogue with next Pope. Lest we break the Liberals' illiberal code. Bellamy Van Alst, Hezbollah may be prepared to use biological weapons in Europe. Denmark, Liberals force immigrant women to work. Belgium, Muslims in EU await fatwa on fish feed containing pork. Al-Qaeda publishes its latest hit list. Holy Moses, 1 down, 9 to go. Dialogue with the Muslims, it's a waste of time. Lest we break the Liberals' illiberal code. Our new intolerance means we must watch our words and our backs, lest we break the Liberals' illiberal code. This was the title of a blog post last week by Christina O'Doney, writing for The Telegraph. On Thursday the 28th of February 2013, the High Court began hearing to decide whether a Christian group that helps gays overcome their sexual inclination has the right to advertise its services. You may remember that Stonewall, the gay rights group, was allowed to run the slogan "Some people are gay, get over it" on London buses. But when Core Issues Trust CIT, a Christian group, decides to counter it with a poster that read "Not gay, post-gay, ex-gay and proud, get over it," Mayor Boris Johnson vetoed their campaign and the TfL, Transport for London, pulled the advert. Christina went on to say, if the High Court ruling goes against CIT, as I fear